Seoul was wrapped in a pale, early winter haze. The morning everything changed. Hanam-dong, normally serene despite its reputation for luxury and exclusivity, was silent except for the occasional hum of distant traffic. Yet, across the city in Seocho-gu, rippled through the soup film building long before the couple arrived. Dozens of journalists, camera operators, and staff from multiple agencies gathered in the third-floor press hall, exchanging glances filled with curiosity and disbelief. It was not a film premiere. It was not a promotional interview. It was not even a light-hearted talk show segment. It was something no one had ever expected. The first time since the birth of their son, Hyun and son Ye-jin were going to speak publicly about parenthood. More specifically, they were ready to address the hidden struggles that had quietly consumed their lives for more than a year. The very thought of the famously private couple opening the door to their personal world had turned the entertainment industry upside down. Even seasoned reporters, veterans of celebrity press events, shifted impatiently in their seats. Some rehearsed questions under their breath. Others adjusted camera settings, wanting to capture every nuance of this unprecedented moment. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Why now? The couple had always been intentional about what they shared. The relationship blossomed under the scrutiny of millions. Yet they had maintained control with a level of privacy rarely seen among top-tier stars. Their wedding had been a masterclass in elegance and secrecy. Their honeymoon had been romantic but shielded. Their pregnancy news had been brief and cautious. And the birth of their son, affectionately nicknamed Alkong by fans, had been handled with almost complete silence. But today, something had shifted. When Hyun entered the press hall first, it felt as though the entire room exhaled at once. Dressed in a dark, simple sweater and tailored trousers, he offered a brief bow. But his eyes carried an unfamiliar heaviness. There was no charismatic smile, no polished performance. It was the expression of a man ready to tell the truth. Son Ye-jin followed moments later. She was wearing a soft cream turtleneck under a beige coat draped loosely over her shoulders. Her hair fell naturally. And although she looked elegant as always, there was a touch of vulnerability in the slight tremble of her hands as she settled into her seat. Reporters noticed it immediately. This was not the radiant actress known for her calm composure. This was a woman who had lived through something profound and exhausting. The cameras finally stopped clicking. The room fell quiet. The host offered a gentle introduction, but even his voice carried a tremor of anticipation. The couple exchanged a glance, one that held layers of unspoken understanding. They had rehearsed nothing. They had agreed that today, for the first time, they would speak honestly. Hyun was the first to break the silence. He leaned slightly forward, his hands on his knees, then inhaled deeply. When he finally spoke, the vulnerability in his voice startled everyone. "I did not expect fatherhood to shake me this deeply," he said. The words echoed in the studio. Some reporters blinked, unsure if they had heard correctly. The Hyun they knew, the unshakable male lead, public speaker, was suddenly confessing uncertainty. He continued, describing the overwhelming fatigue of the first 6 months after Alkong was born. He spoke of nights blurred by constant crying, pacing through dark hallways in their Hanam-dong home, of moments where he rocked his son in his arms while simultaneously rehearsing lines for filming the next day. He described the surreal feeling of holding a child who weighed practically nothing, yet whose needs felt impossibly heavy. "There were nights," he said, voice tightening, "when I questioned myself more than ever before. I wondered if I was doing anything right. I wondered why I couldn't calm him down. I wondered if I was failing him, failing my wife." He lowered his gaze to his clasped hands, as though admitting something he had buried for too long. "I have been confident my whole life, at least professionally. But as a father, I felt lost." The honesty was so raw that even the most seasoned journalists hesitated to write. They simply listened. Next to him, Son Ye-jin remained quiet, her posture unmoving, her eyes focused on her husband with a mixture of empathy and sadness. When the host invited her to speak, she exhaled slowly, as though releasing a weight she had been carrying for far too long. "I was prepared," she began. "I thought I could handle everything." She described the long nights after the birth, when the exhaustion was so heavy it felt like a physical burden pressing down on her chest. She recalled sitting alone in the nursery, the soft light of a small lamp illuminating her face as she rocked Alkong, humming lullabies even when her voice was hoarse. Admitted that she had moments of intense anxiety. Not a clinical diagnosis but an emotional strain fueled by the desire to be perfect. There were nights, she confessed, Alkong would not sleep. And I felt that it was my fault somehow. I questioned my instincts. I wondered if I was doing something wrong. But I did not tell anyone. Not even the closest people in my life. Reporters could see her swallow tightly. The quiet pain beneath her words was undeniable. It was not only from the challenges of parenthood but also from the weight of public expectations. Everywhere they went, cameras followed. Hyundai Seoul in Yeouido. Fans captured photos of the couple during a rare outing with their son. Those images circulated widely, accompanied by glowing commentary. Look so calm. They seem like they have everything under control. Perfect family. But the truth was far from perfect. Before that outing, Alkong had cried for hours. Ye-jin had slept barely 2 hours. Hyun had been pacing with a stroller at 4 in the morning, wondering how much more exhaustion their bodies could endure. Yet, when they stepped into the bright, polished hallways of the department store, they smiled for the cameras because they felt they had to. Later, when the photos went viral, Hyun remembered thinking, if only they knew what last night was like. As Hall absorbed every word with stillness. Confessions then shifted to the moment everything reached its peak, the morning when Ye-jin broke down beside the crib at 4 a.m. and Hyun walked in to find her silently crying. He described the crushing helplessness of that moment. The shared fear that they were failing despite trying harder than ever. The honesty was almost overwhelming. He felt smaller. As if everyone present had been silently ushered into the couple's home, witnessing their most fragile moments. The host gently asked what helped them move forward. Ben exchanged a glance with Ye-jin before answering. We realized we needed to step away, he said. And that became the turning point leading to the Yangpyeong retreat. The decision to leave Seoul, even temporarily, had not been an easy one for the couple. Their work schedules, constant media pressure, and their responsibility as new parents all weighed heavily on their minds. But when Hyun suggested the idea, his voice worn and unsteady, Son Ye-jin immediately recognized the urgency behind it. They were not escaping responsibility. They were trying to save themselves from being consumed by it. Mornings later, they quietly drove out of the city before dawn. The expressway was still dim. Edges of the road wrapped in early fog. Alkong slept in the backseat, bundled in a soft blanket, unaware that this small journey would mark a turning point in his family's life. As they drove past the outskirts of Seoul, scenery gradually shifted from towering buildings and flashing billboards to wide fields, rolling hills, and the gentle curve of the Bukkram River. Pyongyang greeted them with silence. Their private retreat was a small wooden cottage positioned near the riverbank, surrounded by pine trees whose branches swayed slowly in the morning wind. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stretch and breathe, where noise softened, where exhaustion could finally land. First morning, the couple barely spoke. After settling inside, Ben walked out onto the porch with Alkong in his arms. The sun was just beginning to rise, its light dim and cool, washing the river in shades of silver. Ye-jin watched from inside the house, leaning against a door frame, her body still heavy with fatigue. The first time in a long while, her breath didn't feel trapped in her chest. The world around them was quiet enough to hear their own hearts beating. On the second morning, something shifted. It was just past 5 when Hyun stepped outside again. The same sweater from the night before, his hair unstyled, his eyes swollen from sleep. He held Alkong gently, watching the boy's small hands wave aimlessly at the sky. The child was unusually calm, mesmerized by the morning light. Moments later, Ye-jin joined them, a mug of warm tea in her hands. She sat beside her husband on the wooden steps, leaning her shoulder gently against his. And then, without warning, Alkong laughed. Not a small chuckle, not a soft sigh. A full, unrestrained laugh. It startled them both. Hyunbin's head snapped down in disbelief. Ye-jin froze, her breath catching. The sound of their son's laughter rang through the quiet forest surrounding the cottage, echoing off the water and the trees. In the space with something they hadn't felt in months, hope. Later in the interview, Ye-jin recalled that exact moment. Looked at him, and I remember thinking, he is laughing because he feels us together. He feels us calm. That was the moment I realized we had not failed him. We were simply trying too hard to be perfect instead of being present. The couple took a long walk along the riverbank that morning. The stroller slowly over the gravel path, taking in the smell of wet earth and pine. The air was crisp, brushing gently against their tired skin. During that walk, they talked with a vulnerability neither had been capable of in weeks. Hyun admitted he felt helpless every time he saw his wife cry alone. He had wanted to help. He was failing her at every turn. She admitted that she felt guilty for leaning too much on him, even though he had never once complained. They realized how much they had been carrying silently, each trying to protect the other from worry, when in truth, sharing the burden might have saved them sooner. We were acting like two exhausted individuals instead of a team, Hyun said during the interview. In Pyongyang, we finally allowed ourselves to breathe and speak without fear of appearing weak. Their honesty resonated deeply with every reporter in the room. In Pyongyang, the couple spent their days doing almost nothing. They cooked simple meals, took turns napping, sat by the river, listened to the wind, held their baby, and slowly, the tension that had wrapped so tightly around them began to unravel. They returned to Seoul transformed, not suddenly healed, but steadier, grounded. The changes began small. Bin took over the early mornings entirely. He created a quiet ritual, warming the bottle, dimming the lights, humming softly while holding his son near the kitchen window. He found unexpected comfort in the routine, claiming a sense of control that had slipped from him months before. Ye-jin, in turn, embraced the evenings. He developed her own routine for bedtime, reading softly, tapping rhythms on his back, singing the same melody every night. And when her voice cracked from exhaustion, over time, those familiar sounds became cues for their son to relax. The crying gradually lessened. They also created a new habit together, writing notes on a small whiteboard in the kitchen. Nothing dramatic, just small reminders that they were not alone. Sometimes the notes were practical. Sometimes they were simple encouragements to each other. Sometimes, on the hardest days, they were silent apologies written in crooked handwriting. Their home no longer felt like a battlefield. It became a place where they allowed themselves to heal, where exhaustion was shared instead of endured alone. Months later, when they made a public appearance at the Busan Cinema Center, the difference was clear. Their expressions were calmer, gestures softer. They held hands as if rediscovering the steadiness of the bond they almost lost. Reporters in Busan noticed it immediately. Fans on social media commented endlessly about their glow. But what no one saw was the private decision they had made before returning to the public eye, a decision to walk through parenthood together, evenly and honestly, without pretending to be invincible. At the Busan Cinema Center, Hyun told reporters, "Parenthood did not make us weaker. It made us confront parts of ourselves we ignored for years." Son Ye-jin added, "We learned that the hardest moments are the ones that bind us the closest." What they said was simple, but the sincerity behind their words lingered far longer than any explosive headline. Back in the Siacho studio, as the interview neared its end, the couple made one final statement. It was not scripted. It was not polished. It was a quiet truth shaped from the rawest parts of their journey. "We shared this story," Hyun said, "because we wanted people to understand that even with support, even with privilege, parenthood tests you in ways you cannot predict." And followed, "If our honesty helps even one parent feel less alone, then breaking our silence has meaning." The studio remained still, the atmosphere heavy with empathy, not the sympathy reserved for tragedy. Understanding that comes from recognizing shared humanity. Public figures, dressed in perfection and framed by lights, lived through the same fear, exhaustion, and fragile strength as any other parent in Korea. When the cameras finally turned off, stood slowly from the gray couch. They bowed politely to the reporters, their posture composed but their emotions still visible in the small lines around their eyes. As they walked toward the exit, Hyun gently placed his hand on his wife's back, guiding her with quiet familiarity. Outside, Siacho-gu was wrapped in night. The building lights cast long reflections on the sidewalk, and the sound of traffic hummed in the distance. The automatic door slid open, letting in a sharp gust of winter air. The couple stepped out into the cold, side by side, their breath forming soft clouds in the dark. Not rush. They did not hide. They moved with the calmness of two people who had endured something difficult and emerged stronger for it. Behind them, The press hall slowly emptied. Ahead of them stretched the long, winding journey of parenthood, still unpredictable, still demanding, still beautiful in its imperfection. First time since their son was born, Hyun and son Ye-jin walked together without the weight of silence. They had opened the door to their truth, revealing the hidden battles that no photograph had ever captured, and in doing so, they reminded the nation that even the most admired lives are shaped not by perfection but by persistence, vulnerability, and love. They disappeared into the soul night, hand in hand. Their story resonated with every parent who had ever questioned themselves, every mother who had ever cried alone in the dark, every father who had ever felt lost, and every family searching for balance. The lights of the city flickered around them, marking the beginning of the next chapter. A return to the perfect image the world once expected of them, but an honest, enduring journey into the heart of family life. Their silence was gone. Their truth remained.